Now, I'm joined in the studio by Jeremy Scott-Joynt, who is a barrister specialising in commercial crime. Full disclosure, Jeremy is from Outer Temple Chambers, which is my chambers. He's a good friend of mine and I've known him many, many years. He joins me here in the studio tonight. Many of you will have watched or at least heard about the Horizon scandal, the post office scandal, over the last few weeks. Maybe because you watched the fabulous drama on ITV, Mr. Bates versus the post office. Maybe you watched some of the post office inquiry live streaming on YouTube, somewhere else, because it's great. It's just fascinating watching top barristers at the top of their game cross-examining people from the post office. It all stems from the post office being able to bring private prosecutions against over 700 sub-postmasters. But we now know that the prosecutions were based on totally flawed computer evidence. The computer system called Horizon, that's where the name Horizon scandal comes from, the computer system called Horizon just didn't work properly. And the computer was saying monies have been stolen when in fact they weren't. Many of the sub-postmasters involved lost their living, were vilified in their local communities. Some ended up in prison. And Barrister Jeremy Scott-Joynt is going to help me understand what private prosecutions are all about, because it wasn't the state that prosecuted these people. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the CPS. It was the post office acting effectively as an employer or a private individual, legally a private individual, bringing these criminal prosecutions. So what is the difference between a criminal prosecution by the Crown Prosecution Service and a private criminal prosecution? Good evening.
Hi, Daniel. The weird thing is, there is no difference in how it actually works out. If you're accused, if you're charged with a crime under a private prosecution, you get a summons. You go to the magistrate's court. Sometimes you then go onto the Crown Court and face a jury, and you get acquitted or you get convicted. But it's not the state doing it. It could be you or it could be me.
So when the state brings a criminal case, it's bound by something called the Prosecutors Code, which governs the morals, the ethics, the legalities of how it works. Private prosecutors aren't. Can you explain how that makes a difference?
Absolutely. The Crown Prosecution Service, which has been around for about 40 years or thereabouts, whenever a prosecutor is making a decision as to whether someone's actually going to have to go to court, be charged with a crime, it's governed by something called the full code test. And this is compulsory. There's no choice. The prosecutor has to ask themselves, one, is there actually enough evidence that there's a good chance of getting a conviction? Not a sure thing, but a good chance. And then they have to say, is it in the public interest to prosecute? So, for instance, if you've got evidence that an 80-year-old woman who never drives their car has forgotten to renew their tax disc. I know they haven't been around for a little while. That woman is bang to rights. It's what's called a strict liability offence. It doesn't matter whether you knew you did it or not, you did it. Is it in the public interest to prosecute an 80-year-old who never drives for that? Of course it's not. That prosecution shouldn't go ahead. A private prosecutor isn't bound by the code. If they want to do it, they can do it.
So what's to stop anybody from making something up about anybody else? Say making something up about your ex-spouse. And when the CPS decides there's not enough evidence to prosecute, what would be to stop me from bringing a criminal proceeding against my ex-spouse? And if a jury believes they're guilty, off they go to jail.
Number one's money. It's a really expensive job to prosecute someone like that, with a proviso, with a caveat that I'm going to come back to in a moment. So obviously, tends to be people with a lot of money or organisations that can mount private prosecutions. The post office did loads of them, as we know, and heaven knows they were awful. The RSPCA prosecutes lots of people for animal offences, for cruelty to animals. Companies do it for, there are companies set up that prosecute for retailers against shoplifters. Broadcasters prosecute people for hacking satellite feeds, things like that. Mainly, therefore, it's money. There is another backstop, which is in law. The Director of Public Prosecutions, the person who runs the CPS, has the right to call in a prosecution and then discontinue it. So if the DPP hears about a prosecution and it's being done for all the wrong reasons, vindictive, an abuse of the court, just like the Horizon cases we've heard about, the DPP can say, right, we'll have that, and we're stopping it.
In the light of the Horizon scandal, are we likely to see any reform of the system for private prosecutions, Jeremy Scott-Joynt?
3 years ago, there was a report from a parliamentary committee that made a lot of recommendations, and the government went, yeah, no. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, those recommendations are seeing the light of day again, and they're getting a lot more friendly hearing from this current government, but also from the Labour Party. So pretty much whoever wins next time, it's likely that, for instance, private prosecutions will have to be reported to the CPS. If you're going to do a private prosecution, you'll have to alert the CPS to its existence. Because right now, unless the CPS read about it in the papers, they might not know whether they should call it in or not. Another thing is there might be a register of private prosecutors. Only certain people can actually do the job. And that register might therefore have companies, organisations who abuse the power to do it, banned from privately prosecuting. Things like that are likely. A ban on private prosecutions altogether? I doubt it. And actually, there are reasons why they exist and they can be a good idea.
Jeremy Scott-Joynt, thank you very much.